Good afternoon, everyone. All right, you could do better than that. You're getting a snack after this, I think. Come on now, work with a sister. So it's my pleasure to be here. I want to thank the committee for inviting me and have this great opportunity to share with you some of the work that we've done over the several years with the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute Center for Community Engagement to engage community first, because it's the right thing to do. Second, thinking about research strategies in the long run. Forecast, just a kind of a disclaimer. I'm probably not one of your traditional speakers that you've been listening to all day, so just work with me. And I'm not going to jump through. Yeah, where's Mark at? He's gone, right? Yeah, he's gone. So we won't be doing no exercises in Zumba just yet. So a couple objectives for today is just to kind of share with you briefly we're going to go over some definitions of community, community engaged research, community-based research versus community participatory research, real briefly, and then some potential barriers to engagement, principles of engagement, and then explore some engagement work that we've done, and I'll share a few closing thoughts. I don't have any disclosures at this time, so let's get going. So when I think about this, again, thinking about what we've done at the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute, what we've done through our work over the last several years, we've created this asset-based community development model. And we started with thinking about community as a whole. And what I challenge us to do is, we've talked about fluidity all day. The term community is evolved over so many and made so many iterations that it is time for us to really think again, what do we mean by community? So dear colleague, friend of mine, Dr. Quincy, he came and visited us and he was talking about community, and I actually borrowed this slide from him because I love the way he put this first part about the defined geographic and political area. And I love that he's talking about geographical location, right? We often talk about community as people who come from the same community. They're politically sharing space, and then they are possessing common characteristics. I would challenge you to think, what are those common characteristics beyond race, beyond ethnicity, beyond geographic? Let's start digging deep to talk about what are common characteristics. Because just because we both live in 53216, which is a zip code in Milwaukee, does not mean we are all common. And I think we have to get past some of those surface commonalities to start really getting into the underlying things of what makes folks common in community and what makes community, and how does the actual community define themselves when it comes to community. And so I would also ask you, when you're thinking about your work, how do you express community? Do you express community by talking about the folks who are, which I'll talk about that term lay in a minute, community members as those who are underrepresented? Is that community? Or are you talking about the clinicians that you're going to put on the community advisory boards to get answers about the lay community? Didn't say that out loud, did I? But that's the question. Because we have to begin to think about how are we expressing our definition of community actually on the members and the end users of our research projects. We need to really think about that. And is there a difference between community member and community stakeholder? I've been getting this question lately a lot. A community member is, in a lot of our minds, are those people in which we are asking to participate in our research. We think a community stakeholder, on the other hand, are those scientists and those organizations that will drive people and make referrals. I stand to say to you today to think about this and even look at the data, but what I want to encourage you to think about is those people who are your end users for your research, those are your stakeholders. I want you to think about that. You don't have to agree with me, but you can think about that. And then I want you to think about the term lay. We often think of those who are, we use lay to describe people who we think are less educated than we are, who don't have as much experience sometimes as we do when we're thinking about community members. But what I want you to think about, lay may not be a scientist, but the community actually has an expertise about them that we as scientists may not be bringing. So they may be lay members to a community, but are they necessarily lay members to their experience? So that's just a few things I wanted to lay for a foundation as we go today. Again, thank you for having me. So when we think about community-engaged research, again, it's characterized by collaborative partnerships, development, and cooperation, and negotiation, commitment to addressing health issues. There's two approaches, right? There's the community-engaged approach, which has limited community engagement, minimal collaboration, and partnerships, which is pretty much geographic. We know that's very common, but we sometimes confuse that with CBPR and how we describe our engagement and our work with communities, which CBPR is the second one, where the community is engaged equally as partners in all aspects of the research. When we think about the work that we've done at the WAI, as well as my other programs at the university, we certainly talk about this bi-directional relationship that everyone has talked about today. And I want to share with you that we involve community engagement, central and focused. Community engagement, of course, is a bi-directional partnership where folks are all integrated, sharing information back and forth, and actually having decision-making authority as it pertains to what are we going to do collectively to address our health-related research opportunities. We also know that there's part of that is research, teaching, and service, but again, keeping in mind that the community is engaged in those processes is really critical to the work that we do. So when I think about the WAI and our work, we've got 5 integrated missions. I want to draw your attention to this slide to let you know that when we think about community engagement and our work and our scope, that's an umbrella. Community engagement for many folks means it's the only thing that you do when you're trying to work with communities. But there's components to community engagement, which is community, professional education, some things that people talked about today, service, advocacy, and research. Those are components to our community engagement model and strategy. And so I want you to think about it from the context of if you're going to have a full service community engagement model, you have to have multifaceted components to make sure that the work is being done in entirety and in totality. So what are some of the challenges to doing community engagement? This is actually a study that was done by a colleague, Dr. Sue Passmore, and myself, and we talked about to investigators, what are some of your challenges when it comes to enrollment or research or thinking about engaging African Americans into research? And quite frankly, these are some of the biases and some of the attitudes that have come up that continue to plague us in 2023 about why we cannot or will not simply engage these communities. Now you say, well, Gina, well, we already know that. Why is that relevant to what you're talking about for community engagement? It's relevant because if we as investigators have these assumptions and these biases for folks who are trying to build their labs and talk about doing community engagement, you will have these excuses and rationales as to why you think what we're asking you to do or saying is really proper protocol, that is really the right thing to do. You will use these excuses not to do it. And so what we're trying to do through our Just Research training program, we are actually helping to educate PIs and their research teams how to actually overcome some of these assumptions and these biases so that they can actually do proper and appropriate community engagement. So what are some of those principles of community engagement? We've heard this morning, so that's kind of why I'm not going over too many of these, but we've talked about these principles of community engagement. And we know that in our context, and I think does the red button work, or this is not my gifted area. So, see, I done turned the slides back, I done messed up, so I'll just keep it moving. So when we think about principles of community engagement for our work, we understand that there's the long-term commitment to the community. We understand that we have to definitely have partnership and process, building on the strength of the community. Asset-based, what I try to help us understand when we're thinking about our research is that the community has been there longer than we have. The community members understand their circumstances and their situations. What they are most often asking us for are partnerships. They're not asking us to come in often and resolve the problems for us. They're asking for the opportunity to work together in tandem to actually design, develop, and implement programs and research studies that can actually improve health outcomes. I will also say one of the things we often hear from community is that it's not enough to come into our community just to do research. What we have to understand is that when we are gone, when the study has concluded and you've moved on to a new study, which is nothing wrong with doing that, the question is, what are you leaving behind so that the community can remain whole? There used to be a saying that my grandmother used to say this to me, and that was, when you enter a place for the purpose of supporting and helping, you ought to leave it better than when you first came. And I think that is a principle of community engagement. So what are some of the things that we do? I know y'all like, get her off that stage. I'm all good. I told you I was non-conventional. I'm non-conventional. And although I can admit that I'm working on my PhD, I am still Gina Green-Harris, G. Just saying, I'm just going to always be G. So when we think about the work that we've done, we've committed this work called service, right? We believe that our service to the community is about building structural programs that are implemented in the community, with the community, and designed by what is the need. So when we first started our program at the WAI Milwaukee, we started it specifically with research being tertiary, and the first thing we did was go to the community to identify what were those needs. And what they said to us was, we need to understand, first of all, our health, but secondly, we need resources so that we can get into these resource centers and not have to go to 10 different places to get services. So when you think about it, what we designed specifically around people who were being diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia, who were using the diagnostic memory clinics, which I'll talk about in a second, those folks were coming to a hospital that was in an urban setting, but actually not necessarily getting all the services they need after a diagnosis. So what we knew we needed to do was build a component where we would be able to help them transition even after a diagnosis. So we have what we call an in-home memory assessment dementia wellness program, where our staff person actually works with the healthcare systems and our doctors and our FQHCs, along with our diagnostic memory clinics, that once a family is diagnosed, she actually goes into those homes to help those families with that transition. That process started with our program. To date, we have more credibility with providers that come looking for our staff person to say, hey, I need you to go check on this patient. I need you to go do this. What that has done for the community, though, it's helped the provider immensely, but it's helped the community have a reliable source that they can trust, that will go in and help them actually communicate with their provider, communicate with their loved ones. We've gone to family reunions, we've gone to Thanksgiving Day parties, we've done tons of things, all in the name of helping families understand how to get connected to resources through this program. The other thing that we've done, I mentioned the diagnostic memory clinic, and I apologize for not having that slide today, but I can get it to you. We have created this memory clinic inside of a federally qualified health center, and we believe, to our knowledge, that's the first one that was designed specifically for African Americans in the state of Wisconsin through a FQHC. And what that has done is that it's embedded care models, a patient-centered care model that addresses the issues of dementia and diagnosing, but then it goes further, where we have, again, a staff person in Ms. Houston who actually works with those providers, goes back into the family homes after that, but then we went another step and created programs for those families and those caregivers after they've gotten that diagnosis, so they can keep their loved ones home as long as possible, as safe as possible. And that has been something that has been quite successful. The other thing that you'll see on that service slide is our chorus. It's called the Amazing Grace Chorus, and it's actually modeled after the NYU Unforgettable Chorus, Dr. Mary Middleman. We were invited to create this chorus in the African American community over in 2014. We created it not like Dr. Middleman. She allowed us to modify it. We made it a full service program whereby which we are serving those families who are impacted by Alzheimer's with singing. We're giving them in-services. We do respite. We do all that. And you're probably saying, who cares, Gina? We're talking about recruitment. Let me explain to you why that's important. One, those families are so appreciative of what we're doing that we don't have to ask them to participate in research. They ask us, what can we do in order to give back to the work that's being done? And so our work is intentionally culturally inclusive. It is appropriate, it is tailored, and we do not tailor our programs ourselves. I'll talk about our CAB in a second. And you've seen this slide earlier today. This is our continuum of engagement that we use. We certainly started out with this. We really focused highly on that collaborative end and that shared leadership. It was really important that what we did really manifested itself in the fact that we wanted to be embedded in the community. We wanted to be here and part of the fabric work for the long haul, not for research, but for making sure our communities could have resources that they could tap into over time as they age, so they can age well in place. And yes, we know we have to do research, but that is tertiary to the work that was needed at that time for our community. And so I wanted to share this slide with you. This is an example of how we worked with community in order to come with some understanding of how do we actually address disparity in our state. So I had the honor, privilege, I think it was a privilege, opportunity. I was the chair. You don't know what I'm going to tell you I had to do first. I'm sorry. I'm just joshing. But I was the chair of the Governor's Health Equity Council for the state of Wisconsin. So I was appointed by the governor to take on this task. And one of the first things we had to do was to ask community, what did they believe? Our goal was to create a plan that would bring a healthy Wisconsin and improve health outcomes for the state of Wisconsin. And part of that was research. How would this look? And what you see are when we ask the community, what motivates you to contribute, and how do you think about equity? Because that was what they asked. We asked them, what did it take to motivate to contribute? They asked us, what do you think about equity? And then in the center is where we connected and came together. And so I think I shared this slide with you today because what we have found, even at that governor's health equity level, thinking about how these resources are going to improve our health outcomes, are going to improve our research studies over time, the largest thing they wanted was what? Representation and voice and a seat at the table. Does that sound familiar to anyone in here? And so we know shifting of power and resources, those are things that we're asking for, communities are asking for across the continuum. They are relevant to the work that we are doing today in our research studies. And so what are some of the best practices for establishing and sustaining research? When we think about it, we've talked about this all day, but I want us to think about practicing transparency. Dr. Wilkins always talks about trust versus trustworthiness, and we talked a little bit about we think about where do we sit. I think when we talk about the community trust, that's putting the onus on the community. But when we talk about trustworthiness, that's putting the onus on us. So it's comfortable to say, they don't trust us, as opposed to say, we're just not trustworthy. But we've got to start thinking like that. We've got to start talking about it. And we've got to be transparent about our gaps. We've got to be transparent about what are we missing and own those things. And it's not enough to think about them and to recognize them, but the next step is an action step and to do something about them. We really have to practice what we call intentionality. So I think when we think about that, it's really important to tell the community where we know we sit. It's really important to have honest honest conversations with the community about what you can and cannot do as researchers. And we often give this real mystic kind of suspenseful place of where the institution lies. I am saying let's be transparent about what happens on our campuses. Let's bring community to campus. And let's stop this, ooh, I'm going back to my lab to ask. I'm going to go back and, oh, my PI. Those kinds of things actually impact our ability to engage communities. Let's talk about developing best practices and a shared common language. We've talked about that over, so I won't reiterate, but when I'm talking about common language, I want you to make sure when you use the word lay community, the community is using that same term for lay community, because lay community could be simply, that's what we call people in the church. Some people say church stuff. Other people are saying unprofessionals. What do we mean by the word lay community? What do we mean by that? We really want to have this shared common language. When we're talking about giving people honorariums, what does that mean to the community? What does that mean to us? When we're talking about distribution, when we're talking about coming back and sharing the data, you know, we use all these nice scientific words to describe what we're doing. They're all encrypted. Are those the same words that the community would use to describe what we're doing? We need to think about that. Develop inclusive frameworks. Frameworks, again, thinking about the social justice model. Many of us, you know, I'm doing my work, but what I understand and knew in the past, but really know now through the data, most of what we're talking about when it comes to engagement, it actually is a social justice model. It is and it's a PAR model. It is participatory action research. We're talking about policy sometimes. We're talking about practices and practicalities. So we really need to think about, are we doing that? Are we using the right models for our research? And I will add that there's not a cookie cutter approach, but you already knew that, so you didn't need me to say that. There is ongoing education, not only for community, but between the community and the research teams. And then focusing on sustainability. I would challenge us to think about, as we are starting, and you guys have heard this is nothing that's new, it's not new and it's not rocket science, but I want us to think about sustainability before we start thinking about the end of the grant. What do you plan to leave behind is the most important question you ask yourself when you're starting a grant or starting a research study. And so we talk about advocacy here. So many of you know that my near and dear thing are community advisory boards. I believe in community advisory boards because they are just authentic voices from community when they are allowed to be. We started our community advisory board at the start of our program in 2009. Since that time, they have helped well over 100 to 200 investigators do their research. Those who have taken that advice are highly likely to be funded. We are in the process of developing paper on the data that we have, so I don't have those numbers, but the next time, if I ever get invited back, I'll make sure I share that. So we definitely know that we believe the community advisory boards are a direct conduit to share the voice of the community. They have helped us to identify barriers in our research process, in our research participation. They've been very clear with us why folks aren't participating, and it's not the community's fault. They have helped investigators really take a step back to think about how they are framing their research. What are they framing in their research? And asking the question, why are you doing the research? Those are important things that community advisory boards are asking. And then, you know, they have been recognized. This community advisory boards is recognized by science and some researchers across the UW, as well as at our sister universities, Marquette University, other non-UW entities have actually engaged our community advisory board. And so we don't take it lightly. We honor them, we value them. And I will tell you that since 2009, we've lost, I will say, 3 community advisory boards. One we lost to the advancement of Alzheimer's and dementia because we have people who are living with. The second one we lost were some folks who moved away. And then the third one, we don't know, just lost. So we keep in touch as much as we can, but I'm being transparent. But other than that, the other 15 members of our community advisory board remain. And so that is a testament to the work that they believe that they're doing. The other thing I will tell you about our Community Advisory Board is we are so proud. We have community advisory boards that we have helped groom. They get lots of training and education, but we had a brother and sister who came to us when they were probably about 18 and 20, and their mom died of dementia when they were 16 and 15-ish, right? And so we met them, and they came to our Community Advisory Board, and they really wanted to work. Well, I will tell you, they are now owners of their own company in the community to help people with respite, with Alzheimer's and dementia, and they have just gotten full funding from their first large grant. So we're excited about that. So as I get ready to take my seat, for those of you who go to church, know that's the first closing. What's next in our bidirectional, I believe what's next for bidirectional engagement, from promises to practice. We've been talking about this. I think someone said it this morning. I think it was you, Dr. Wilkins, that talked about, we've been doing this for what, 25, 30 years now, since the inception of saying we need to be inclusive. We need to have women and minorities represented in research. We've been doing this a while. And so I encourage you, as you think about today, as you think about tomorrow, as you think about your work, promises to practice. Here's some of the points of engagement that I believe are critical to the work that we do. The first thing I ask you is, what's your personal mission and vision? What's your why? If you need to back up and think about why you do what you do. Why did you start doing this work in the first place? It can't be because I needed grant money. It can't be because I just wanted, this is where my path led me. You really have to have an intentional rationale and why for why you're doing what you're doing. I need you to think about having actionable, measurable organizational goals beyond a checklist, beyond checking the list to say, yes, we participated in this, we participated in. What is your organizational measurable goals? If you know that your organization is not diverse, you need to start talking about that transparently and set measurable goals to switch and grow your organization to become more diverse. I know I'm not getting invited back, but I think this is something you definitely need to do. You need to be able to articulate your mission, your vision statement, and your purpose. There should, every time you walk in the community, you should have a mission statement, a vision statement, and the purpose for showing up. And I want to give you a news flash, which you've heard all day. The major purpose for going in the community is not to recruit. Say that with me. The major reason to go in the community is not to recruit. It can happen, but it should happen organically. It should happen authentically. And then we talk about, she's like, oh, okay. I want you to learn about your community. We talked about this before. You make an ask. Genuineness and integrity is really critical. And then trust the process of authenticity and be willing to be vulnerable in communities. It leads to transparency and longevity of commitment from community. Be willing to be vulnerable. Make a mistake. Tell the community if you make a mistake. Own it. They will appreciate your honesty and your integrity than if you try to cover it up. And then I asked you to make a conscious decision about being created to being sustainable. I said that earlier. What is your legacy? Ask your program. As a PI, ask your team. Ask every part of who you are in your institutions. What's our legacy? What's our goal as an institution? And then finally, those bidirectional community. Develop those with openness. It brings openness, learning, and trust, and then finally trustworthiness. And I believe these are my final thoughts. So you say, what about all this research, Gina? Yep, so research has worked. We have, and I think, I know some research, I know Dr. Gleason's AA Fame is here, and Dr. Johnson, I don't see Sterling, but when we first started doing our work in the community, I think we had less than 1 or 2% of folks who are enrolled in our research study, and I believe we're now up to 15% of folks who are actually involved, or if not more, of our research study. And when we think about those numbers, that is really significant for our program. We also know that when we think about how we started out, when we initially started doing our recruitment, we were doing really a clinical referral. We were not doing community engagement. We did not have activities, whether it be across the ADRCs or WAI, but we all have since come together and drank the same Kool-Aid out of the same pitcher, and we are now thinking about how engagement engagement strategies are necessary and essential to the work that we do. So I will leave you with these thoughts. Community engagement is not a one-size-fits-all or cookie-cutter approach. Your CE strategy, community engagement strategy, should be reflective of your community. It is critical to have your community around. Value the community as equal partners, and sometimes they're more knowledgeable than you, and that's okay, and it's okay to embrace that. And then I'll say mistakes and errors will happen. Be prepared to shift and apologize. Create and maintain formal and informal alliances with allies that can offer guidance and assistance. That is really important. You need to make sure you have people you can trust to talk to about what decisions you're making related to community, and when you make a mistake, you need to be able to go back and fix those. But you have those allies who can actually pull your coattail to say, hey, you're not making the mark. You're not doing it right. And guess what? Sometimes that has to be you as an investigator to do that to someone else. And by the way, if you lent your intellectual property, or if you lent your time and you gave your referral to another partner who's not getting it right in the community, the onus is on you to actually go back to that person and discuss what's happening, because the community is going to hold you accountable. I'm just saying. And then finally, set reasonable goals for progress, evaluate and assess your community engagement strategies, often with your partners. Thank you so much for your time.